2. Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. We're off to Seattle, and then it's bye week around here, but certainly a tough test for the Ravens as they head out to a city I love, a city this guy has adopted from Midwestern roots. Been out in Seattle. He's the sports anchor at King 5 TV in Seattle. You can find him out on Twitter amongst all of his Hockey Town paraphernalia and Red Wings propaganda. He is Paul Silvi. You can find him out in Seattle, and Paul Silvi out on Twitter. What's going on, Paul? How are things out there? I'm looking forward to coming out. First off, the Who are playing on Saturday night. The Huskies have a big home game against Oregon. I mean, it's big doings out in Seattle this weekend, right?
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's a big weekend, especially for football. So there's a lot of people looking forward to Sunday for sure to have Earl Thomas back in town. That'll be one of the underlying stories for sure.
Man, you got in your homeland, the Spartan and the Big House and Harbaugh's brother and all that stuff. I got to be honest, I've always wanted to go to a game at Husky Stadium. Like, I see it, and I see the blimp shots back when Keith Jackson was calling games, on Nelly and all that stuff. And I've driven up toward Vancouver a couple times and checked it out. But give me a little vibe on the experience, because I know they played a season or two, right? The Seahawks played maybe 15 years ago there for a minute or two, and that's a pretty cool place, I think, a Pac-10 ball game on the water, right?
Yeah, I mean, as a matter of fact, I mean, it's definitely one of the top 5 for sure, and with all the boats coming in, doing some tailgating out there, and the setting is awesome. I mean, you got to remember that Paul Allen, when he first bought the Seahawks and they started designing CenturyLink Field, he loved the way Husky Stadium looked with the cantilever and the two sides covered, and the fans were covered, but the field wasn't. So when you look at CenturyLink Field, that's kind of how he wanted that design. So he had a big say in the way CenturyLink Field looks, and that's why it has somewhat of a mirror image of Husky Stadium.
Yeah, I mean, I'm feeling really foolish if I'm there. I'm never in Seattle, right? I mean, I come out every couple of years. Last time I was out was Pearl Jam, or when U2 plays and the Who's in this weekend. So things are lining up, but I didn't even think about the Husky game, and this is a big game, right? So, I mean, if Raven fans are going out, this is going to be sort of a really cool sort of sidelight for the 12th Man and Legion of Boom and Earl Thomas's homecoming and all that, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to take in a college game, it's that Huskies Ducks game is a fierce rivalry. They do not like each other, and if you can get a ticket for that one on Saturday night, that's the place to be for sure.
Yeah,
so
$1.25, right? $1.25 right now for that. Look, every time I'm in Seattle the last decade, and I'll tell you, the first time I landed in Seattle was Kingdome. What was it, 96, 97? 97 playoffs. I was out there for all that Randy Johnson and all that, and this is when the cement's falling in on Sid Fernandez and all that stuff, right? And I've never been in a louder building, right? And I remember all that, and the Seahawks were a little bit of an afterthought at that point. Certainly when the kid was playing and Johnson, Buhner, all those guys were there. A-Rod, early versions of A-Rod coming in. But the Seahawks have owned the place. And I remember being in New York for the Super Bowl and seeing that weird crayon day-glow green sort of taking things over. And Pete Carroll.
Action green, man.
What is that called?
It's Action Green.
Action.
Get it right, Nestor.
It's Action Green. I'm just getting it right.
That's what they call it officially.
It's not body tape green. We have that yellow here in Baltimore, but every time I'm out there the last decade, concerts, summertime, I was out there on my 30-30 tour doing baseball back in 15. The whole city's sort of swathed in green. I mean, and now the team's good again, and you still have the same captain. I mean, our captain got overthrown off the boat last year with Flacco, Suggs, Weddle, Mosley. We've had a lot of changes here, but there's a Russell Wilson thing that you're now seeing a team like us coming in there trying to emulate this a little bit, as are Houston and a bunch of other people, because Russell Wilson is the beginning of the next thing that quarterbacks are, and here we go again, and Carroll feels like he's reloaded a little bit out there, huh?
Yeah, I think that anytime you have Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson running the show, you always have a chance to win. And John Schneider's done a nice job as a GM. But with Russ, Pete, and Bobby Wagner on the defense, you're always going to be in these games. And that's the best thing about this team, is that even when they're down 2 touchdowns, you just get that feeling they're going to come back.
Well, we had Earl Thomas here beginning in the spring, all summer long. I don't want to say it feels like a rent-a-player here because it's not the way the Ravens operate. I mean, the Ravens have brought in more Earl Thomases over the last 15 years than I can name, from, the Derek Masons and the Trevor Prices and the Eric Weddles and the Anquan Boldens. They've had a lot of guys on second team, maybe not this far through. Can you run me through like the dummies guide to Earl Thomas for Seattle? Everything everyone would know about him from Seattle to what he's been here in Baltimore, which is, I don't know. I don't want to say just a guy because I think he's certainly more than that. But the whole thing here is in transition defensively, and he's come into that at a later stage. There's a lot of people saying, well, we know he was a great player at one point. Tell me about the Earl Thomas that you know, Paul.
Well, the thing about Earl, you hear it all the time. Oh, he's a competitor, but man, he is an absolute fierce competitor. He cannot stand to lose. It could be the most simple pass play over the middle, and he's gonna light you up. He doesn't realize that he's so light when it comes to the lbs and the pounds. He's not a big guy, but he throws himself at you like he's Cam Chancellor. So, he's just a fierce, hard hitter, and he will not take losing. In fact, over the last couple of years, his last 2 years in Seattle, he shut it down verbally. Like, he used to go to the podium and kind of put on a show and speak otherworldly terms and phrases that you're like, whoa, man, he's in the Earl zone. And then last couple of years, he just shut it down and wanted to do his talking on the field. And he's just, he had that thing with Cam Chancellor and Richard Sherman where they would just look at each other and knew what to do on that play. They didn't have to do hand signals, nothing. Just one look, got it, we're good, and they would destroy the play. So, and his leadership, second to none. So, and he's not a guy who's going to rah-rah. He's a guy that's going to go out there and lay people out, make huge plays, and all those other DBs around him, and in fact, the whole defense is going to be better for it.
Paul Silvi joining us here from Seattle, where I'll be getting coffee and probably eating some fresh fish and probably having all sorts of catching up to do with some friends out there, as well as the Who and Husky Stadium, and certainly a nice showdown and a nice test for the Ravens. In rebuilding something, in retooling, and, I think you've seen your baseball team out there ripped up and down 5 times since those Kingdome days. We've sort of had the same issue here with 108 losses, and now we're going to be watching the Nationals 38 miles down the road play World Series games next week. For the Seahawks and where they are in retooling, Pete Carroll's a huge part of this, right? And I go back 20 years. I did a nationally syndicated show back at the turn of the century on Sporting News, and this is when Pete got kind of spit out of the NFL in New England, and before the Genius showed up, and before he went to the Pac-10 and went back to college and all that stuff out in California and built his dynasty at USC. He's had an incredible second act, but more than that, sort of a third or a fourth act in football terms, in that much like Harbaugh, much like Sean Payton or the surviving coaches, Marvin Lewis was that guy up until last year, right? Where you do get a second or a third chance, even if it's the same quarterback, but Pete Carroll really beloved there, right? Like he's part of the Seahawks, right? Like there's a whole faction of fans that have come along that can't imagine, like even here, a life with Brian Billick amongst some people, because it's been 13 years now,
Yeah, Pete is hugely popular out here, and when we first came up here from USC, remember the Huskies and USC, there was another rivalry back then when Pete used to come up here and just pound the Huskies, and they did not like, these people up here did not like the fact that a USC head coach was coming up to coach their NFL team. So, but once he got here and he did things his way, and they started winning, man, oh man, people have just rallied around this team since he's been here. So, he got here in 2010, and he's been rolling, ever since he got here, and he's doing everything right. The one thing you have to keep in mind about Pete, and he says it all the time, the big difference between being the head coach of the Jets and the Patriots back in the day is he listened to a lot of people and didn't do it his way. And then he said when he went to USC, he changed it up and he just wanted to do it his way. He was going to block out the outside noise, and the same thing mentality when he came to the Seahawks. And so that's why he's so successful now. Is he's got this thing dialed in, and it's a successful method, and that's why he's one of the most successful coaches in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, he really is special, right? I mean, very few guys have been willing to either go back to college, and, I spent time with Jack Del Rio recently, and, maybe that's where he'll go. Marvin went back to college, right? I mean, after 30 years, he's running around Arizona State trying to figure out how to beat Washington and Oregon and all the rest of these teams. And there is something to be said about that. But Pete's enthusiasm, right? Like, Pete has always had, like, that 18-year-old boyish thing, and he was sort of the man-child in the NFL and brought sort of theories and weirdness and rock and roll and music on the field, and practice needs to be fun and it needs to be an experience. He was one of the first people to really sort of bring that in at a time where, like, it was still old ball coach Oklahoma's sort of method, right?
Yeah, I mean, you just throw in the fact this guy's, 68 now, and
I still think he's 50, but I'm 51. How the hell can he be 51? I'm 51.
Yeah, exactly. He has so much energy, and we were in Cleveland and they won that game, and John Schneider came off the field, and we're on the sideline. I'm standing there and waiting for this thing to end, and it ends. He comes up. He high-fives Walter Jones, the Hall of Famer, and then he high-fives me. Then he runs over to Pete, high-fives, slapping hands, huge hug, like they just won a playoff game. We're not even at the halfway point of the season, and this guy's so jacked over just winning a football game. And, it's wild to see. His enthusiasm is through the roof, and it doesn't matter how big or how small the game is. It's fun to watch, and you can tell whenever they put the Seahawks on national TV, they've always got a camera on Pete because they know that he's. It's fun to watch, and it's much more fun when they're winning.
Paul Silvi's here, sports anchor at King 5 TV in Seattle, and a Detroiter. And how many years in Seattle for you? And more than that, like, I'm only coming out for a day or two. I've never really spent a week in Seattle. I think the longest I've been there is maybe 3 or 4 days, and I'm always usually on to Vancouver, down to Portland, or seeing friends, or doing whatever. I've never been to the Gorge, so stone me for that. I made it to Spokane finally last year by way of Yellowstone and Pearl Jam in Missoula, Montana, and did all this cool stuff. But, like, Seattle, I'm coming into Seattle. I got a bunch of friends. I'm gathering them somehow on Saturday and doing some stuff. Give me a little primer, man. Like, what's awesome about Seattle?
Well, I've been here 26 years.
Wow.
As you've alluded to, I'm a Detroit guy and a Lions guy, and I've been able to just enjoy the football life for sure. But out here, it's just like you see it, man. It's outdoorsy. People are always looking to do some stuff outside. You can go down and watch them throw the fish at Pike Place Market, which is as cliche as it gets. But you got to get out, to some of the other areas and see what goes on. And really. There's nothing in my book. There's nothing better than going out toward Mount Rainier, because that's one of the wonders of the world, man. 14,600. I climbed that thing with Jim Mora and Roger Goodell back in 2009 when we had a big crew that went up there.
How much training, Jeff? I mean, seriously, give me a little primer on, like, what your lungs felt like that day.
Nothing. Like, it's just a slog. It's just a big old walk up a big old hill. And there's some danger because there's some 200, 300-foot crevasses up there that even Roger Goodell had problems stepping over. But again, you're on a rope and it's fun. And you weren't. The hardest part about it was walking down because you're smashing your toes into your boots and you're losing toenails. By the time you get to the bottom, you're in so much pain. And but again, walking up was a little, I'd say, a tad easier than walking down. But
what I'm going to do? What I always do, look at it from the freeway and wave to it. And when the plane comes out of SeaTac, if it goes the right way, try to take a picture out the window. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, man.
That's what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so if I was coming up here, I'd make some time to get out of town a little bit, man. See some of the waterfalls and some things that they have here. It's really cool.
All right, best restaurant in town. Come on, give me a place. Give me a place to eat in Seattle this Saturday night. Where am I going?
Listen,
keep in mind, I'm seeing Roger and Pete afterwards. I mean, when won't get fooled again is the encore. The meals better be good.
You can never go wrong, and I wish they were paying me for this, but you can never go wrong with Daniel's, man. They make great steaks. They got a great atmosphere, and I would say the one downtown on the water is probably where you want to be. Second best would be up top in the Bellevue Hyatt. So there you go. So Daniel's Broiler would be my suggestion because you can never go wrong. You never leave there and say, man, that sucked.
All right, we got to get to the part that I called you about, which is the football game and the team. So, little primer on this year's version of what we're going to see. Clearly, we run the ball well. Clearly, defensively, we've had some issues. This feels like a tall tree for the Ravens to climb, to get on a plane, go 3,000 miles, and go out there and beat a team that cleaned our clock. I mean, the Browns were very impressive once against us. It hasn't looked much like that. You just got off a plane from Cleveland as well. Some thoughts about the 5-1 Seahawks? Pretty heady out there right now. Looks like they put the band back together.
Yeah, their offense will keep them in every game. But let me tell you something, man. That defense, Pete Carroll has said it, and he didn't see what he wanted to see against the Browns. He wanted to see them up the pressure on the quarterback. They only have 10 sacks, and there's only like 5 teams in the NFL who have less. 3 of those teams are the Bengals, Jets, and Dolphins. So he wants to be able to get to the quarterback. He signed Ziggy Ansah in the offseason. They got Jadeveon Clowney in the trade with Houston. So it's like you've got these horses up front. Now they're going to get Jaron Reed back. So that's a huge thing for this game. So it's just one of those things where defensively they have this bend but don't break mentality, and it's driving Pete Carroll nuts. And he wants more pressure on the quarterback. They didn't sack Baker Mayfield. They didn't even get credit for a hit on Baker Mayfield. That's pathetic. So this defense has got to get it going because they may win some games. They won't win any championships the way they're playing.
Russell Wilson, where he is and, what he's become and some thoughts about his leadership. And, again, we jettisoned Joe Flacco here. We now have Lamar. It feels like we never had any time without a quarterback or having to try to figure it out as we come out there believing we're a playoff team or at least a division winner or can be that with the lead we have at this point. But to see the maturation of Russell Wilson and the deniers and the haters and the doubters and the, whatever he didn't have or people thought he didn't have or the running game, and certainly they led with their defense in the championship era. I've always loved his game. I've always wondered whether there was another guy like him, though, right? Sort of like that Drew Brees, sort of the anomaly guy. Like, how are you going to do that? That's kind of a unique package that he brings.
Yeah, you know what? He's a fantastic athlete. He gets to the podium and you hear the same stuff over and over, but that same stuff that's in his mind when he's talking to reporters is the same stuff that's in the huddle and on the field in those clutch moments. He never gets too high, he never gets too low. He's just even keel, and I'm telling you, he is a tremendous athlete. And when they're down, like I said, when they're down 2 touchdowns, there's just even when they're down 3 touchdowns, when they trailed the Saints and they were just they were stepping all over themselves, and the coaches were making horrible decisions. You still felt like they had a chance in that game. It was never going to be over until that final tick. So. Just the fact that he's so accurate, he's yet to throw an interception this year. It's just stellar. The guy is really, and I really believe that, and I think I see it nationally now, but a few weeks ago it was starting to creep up that he is the leading MVP candidate. I mean, he's carrying that team, and they've got just enough weapons, but he's really playing his best football.
12th man, nothing like it. We're going to come out and see it all in Seattle. Paul Silvi's joining us from King 5 out in Seattle, Washington, where it is a big weekend, and a lot of Ravens fans are going out there. We only get out there every 8 years or so for the good coffee and all that stuff. Last thing for you, first thing, we can talk about the incredibleness of all these players and all these athletes and stuff, but I have an affinity for Shaquem Griffin. I lost my finger when I was 3 years old, so I had fastballs, curveballs, sliders, picking up a pen, learning to type, doing all these weird things, doing funny things on video where I fake like I pick my nose and weird stuff. But seeing a guy make the NFL the way he has, I mean, the Jim Abbott thing to me is still the craziest. And you talk about all the greatest accomplishments in baseball. I saw Jim Abbott, dude, throwing no-hitters the way he did. And I know you got a Detroit Jones in you as well. But being around a kid this inspirational, I'm out with O.J. Bergantz and what he's gone through. And my wife's a 2-time leukemia survivor. I see incredibly inspirational things happen every day. But a dude with one arm in the NFL, boy, that's something you come to practice every day. I don't think you can ever get used to that or just take that thing for granted. It's an incredible story.
Yeah, and I will, before I talk about Shaquem, I will mention that, Jim Abbott, and I worked in Flint, Michigan for 4 years. That dude, I watched him hit a home run in high school, and really was. It was phenomenal to see what he could get done. But
I grew up. My dad grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I grew up in East Baltimore, baseball guy. My dad played little league ball with Pete Gray, like the famous one-arm player. Like my dad knew him, like literally, from the same area, the whole deal. So I heard that story my whole life, and then toward the end of my dad's life, my dad died in '92. Jim Abbott came along, and at that point, it's like we haven't seen one since, right? I mean, like it is Halley's Comet, I think, for especially for this young man, too.
Yeah. I mean, he was an incredible athlete, and as far as Shaquem goes, listen, he's a hard hitter. He hustles. He's still having a tough time learning, but the good thing about him is he's killing it on special teams. They put him on punt cover, kickoff cover, like he hustles down the field. He hits like no other. But the one thing about him is, number one, he's really fortunate to be learning under Bobby Wagner, KJ Wright, even Michael Kendricks for that matter. Their linebacking core of the Seahawks is second to none. So they're getting the job done. That's why he's not seeing the field too much. They're staying healthy, and of course they're really good. So he's learning from those guys, and when he's ready to take over, I think he's going to be able to play at that level. Not so much at the Bobby Wagner level, but I mean at the NFL level as a linebacker, as a starting linebacker, I think this kid can play, and we know he can hit. So. But right now he's just biding his time and he's learning the game because remember now he started the very first year, his very first game last year in Denver. He started, it did not go well and he was out by the halftime because he didn't quite grasp what was going on in the defensive schemes and all those things. So now he's had a chance to learn a lot more over a longer period of time, and he's still a very young man. So he's got a lot of football ahead of him.
Hey, man, appreciate the visit. As always, look forward to seeing you out in Seattle. Daniels, I got it. The Mountains, I got it. Seahawks, I got it. And we'll find our way around. Really appreciate your time, as always.
You got it, Nestor. Thanks for having me.
Great guest, Paul Silvi, joining us from King 5 Sports Anchor out in Seattle via Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. And looking forward to this. It's a great trip. It's a great stadium. The Earl Thomas thing, I guess the over-under on that's going to be like 45 seconds on how much standing 12 love they're going to give him. And that competitive green. Action green. Action green, I love it. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat. I'm out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world, including Seattle and Portland and even Vancouver, Washington, as well as Vancouver, BC, north of the border. I am going to be doing some bye-bye programming next week, which is our Baltimore Positive programming. So you're going to hear a lot of Don Moeller and I talking to awesome people doing awesome things to make life better here in the land of pleasant living. It is Baltimore Positive, all brought to you by our friends at Fadley's and Jennings and State Fair and all of our WNST sponsors, including Cole Roofing. I've got my I keep the Preakness in Baltimore pin. Got to keep getting that right up on the camera. Make sure you're giving some love to those folks. Bill Cole's up in the buyatoyota.com audio vault talking about saving the Preakness as well. The other Bill Cole, two Bill Coles. Bill Cole Roofing, Bill Cole Preakness. Make sure we get all that square. Dennis Kolatzis will be here on Thursday driving you home. It is the SSV on WNST through bye week, getting you up on Halloween, getting you up on the New England Patriots, and getting you ready for the Seattle Seahawks and all things Seattle and Pike Place and salmon and all that weird stuff down at the Pike Market, which I'm sure I'll do again because I always do it. Even though I say I'm not going to do it, I'm going to do something new. Wherever Uber takes me. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.